We are very lucky to have 3 interviews on the Jazz Poetry Group. The Jazz Poetry Group was a very innovative blending of poetry and music that began as a simple duet, adding Ron Cuccia's genius poetry and expanding to include Leigh, then John Magnie, as the group matured. This episode starts off as an interview, but telescoped into not only talking about Leigh, but into the formation of the group and the birth of the song that became her signature, My Darlin New Orleans. All 3, John Magnie on keyboards, Ricky Sebastian on drums, and Ramsey McLean, who formed the group, co-wrote My Darlin New Orleans and played bass, have much to say. Taken together, a single episode would run over 40 minutes, so I decided to break it down into 3 segments. The first, with Ricky Sebastian, includes playing the great track from their LP, Jazztown, with Leigh on vocals. The second segment begins again with Ricky, where he talks about the birth of My Darlin New Orleans from a drummer's standpoint. Then it continues with an interview with John Magnie giving his perspective on the song. The third is with Ramsey McLean. Since he started the group at Lou and Charlie's with saxophonist Charles Neville, he has a lot to say, all interesting to say the least. And his segment ends with the Jazz Poetry Group's recording of Streets, My Darlin New Orleans. One brilliant composition with 2 of Ron's odes to his home city put together and delivered by Leigh, sung in a New Orleans style only she could do. So please take the time to listen to all 3 segments. You won't be disappointed. Today we have with us Rick Sebastian, the drummer for the Jazz Poetry Group. Welcome, Rick.
My pleasure.
So we're talking today about the very interesting and one-of-a-kind jazz poetry group that Leigh was a member of. A combination of Ron Cuccia, Charles Neville, Ricky Sebastian, and Ramsey McLean, and later John Magnie joined the group. Am I correct there?
Yeah, that's correct. That was the personnel.
Great. Okay, so will you tell us about working with Leigh, like how you met her and what was going on at the time and when and all that stuff?
Yeah, I first started hearing about Leigh and Little Queenie and the Percolators sometime around, I'd say 1977, 78. I had gotten out of Berkeley College of Music in 1976 and moved back to New Orleans, and started my career there as a professional musician, and was pretty new on the scene and started hearing about this group. So I went out to see them, and I met Leigh, and we started talking about possibly collaborating on some things. I would go and sit in with the band on 1 or 2 songs, and so some time passed, and I started to realize that Leigh had a big interest in jazz as well as the kind of music that the Percolators were doing. So I guess this was around 1979. Tyler's Beer Garden was a club in uptown New Orleans that had live music, and they were starting to focus a lot on jazz and more frequently. So I ended up putting a group together that included Leigh on vocals, and I want to say it was Alvin Young on bass. I believe Michael Polera played piano sometimes. That was a long time ago, so I don't really recall exactly who was in the group. I do know that Wynton and Branford Marcellus came and played with us a couple of times. They were a little bit younger than me. So they were probably still teenagers, and I was in my early. I might have been, 20, 21 years old at the time. So Leigh and I started working there together, just exploring different kind of jazz tunes that she liked. And that was a really fertile breeding ground for a lot of young musicians, Tyler's Beer Garden was.
Yeah, the uptown music scene was really vibrant at that time with all these little clubs and great musicians able to play there.
Yeah, Jimmy's is another club I recall. I would go and sit in. Percolators played there pretty regularly, and I recall going there and sitting in with them. So I don't
So,
know. Leigh and I probably did some things together, Tyler's, for a year, maybe two at the most.
so out of this, is that how the jazz poetry group got started?
It had a little something to do with it. I was also playing with Ramsey McLean in a group that he had called the Lifers, and Charles Neville was in that band also. Honestly, I don't recall how Ron Cuccia got into the picture. I know Ramsey knew him. I didn't know Ron, but then the idea started to come together to do this project, mixing Ron's street poetry with jazz, And Ramsey was real big into the avant-garde free jazz scene, and he was kind of my introduction into that genre of music. So all these forces started coming together. We're doing the free jazz thing, and I'm doing other types of jazz with Leigh at Tyler's, and then Ron Cuccia gets involved with the poetry, and the next thing I know, this idea is being formulated to put all these elements together. And so we started getting together with the group that you mentioned for the jazz poetry group with Ron, and started seeing what we could come up with. It was a super creative project. I think Ramsey and Charles and Ron had gotten together first. This is how I remember it anyway. And then Leigh and I were asked to get on board, and then later John Magnie was added on piano.
So, can you talk about the development of the songs? I understand, of course, you weren't involved with the writing of them, but the foundation, the rhythm section, the bass, and the drums.
Well, we would have a rehearsal, and it would be with the full group, and Ramsey and Charles would have an idea of a particular song, with the chord changes and maybe kind of an idea about what kind of feel for it. And we would work that up. And then Ron would come in with the poems that he was going to read. And that would be my introduction to what the actual lyrics of the song were going to be. And sometimes there was such a creative situation that there would be certain lyrics that are poetry that he had, that we would try to make musical representation of what the lyrics or the poetry, the images that the poetry was trying to create, so we would try to do things with the music that would reflect the imagery that his poetry was creating, if that's about as succinct as I can put it.
Well, that's very good. And Ron was a very good poet. Every one of the songs on the Jazz Poetry Group LP is just amazing lyrics to it all. He was so good about painting pictures in your head, period.
Yeah, I have to agree. He was very good at that.
I was going to play this tune, Jazztown, which has some great lines in it. One of the Leigh is, music is all I want. Everything else is just the front in Jazztown. And I really like the way that line stood out in that recording.
Yeah, another thing I liked about that particular song in poetry, that the way it ended up, was there were a lot of breaks in the music, which allowed the lyrics to really come out.
Yeah.
And then the band would come back in after a long thing was spoken, almost like an answer to a question,
Oh, yeah. It's really brilliant.
The success of that project, I think, really surprised all of us. But in hindsight, it was so original for the time period. I don't recall ever hearing anybody else trying to do something like that. And I'm sure maybe there was something similar done in the 60s, maybe with these beat poets. And, that's not a field I was really exposed to a lot and know a lot about. But in hindsight, the Jazz Poetry Group was doing something very, very original in this area. And I think that it could have gone on to create a record or even more than another one. We were all really young. We didn't know a lot about the business side of the music,
and it's an unfortunate thing that happens. We're going to play Jazztown, and then we will be back shortly.
Face burn like a blue tip flame,
sax blowing like a midnight train.
Well, I feel the need to make this piano bleed.
Music is all I want, everything else is just a front for Jazztown, Jazztown, Jazztown. When lights burn down,
Drum will beating out his brain.
woman sing about God and say,
Well, I feel the effects of jazz is the opposite sex.
music is all I want, everything else is just a front for Jazztown, Jazztown, Jazztown. When lights burn down.
You know, musician life is just fast food. You get boiled in a bag by some crazy mood. Bar on the heat, get like a microwave. You finally get to sleep in an early grave. Wake up again with the hunger pains. Take a sugar cube and a dash of cocaine. A bark fruit beer, a fried pie, double scotch, and a Spanish fly. 2 tacos and a burrito. Throw in that chiquita. Catch up your pickle and lettuce, tomato. Catch up your pickle and lettuce, tomato, baby. Lettuce, tomato. Lettuce, tomato. You know, just last night I had a TV dinner. Ate the knobs, ate the antenna. It was such a thrill, ate Angela Hill. Got caught by the action reporter. Musician's life, just fast food. Music get hot, you get barbecued. But it ain't so hip to be a potato chip. I'd rather be pickled by your sweet lips. Just put me in a jar, preserve me till fall. Just let me know when it's over, y'all. 'Cause I've been lewd, stewed, mama rude by too much fast food. You know, you eat enough chicken in a basket, you'll become a basket case. Your fingers turn into French fries. You get mayonnaise on your face, hamburger pies. You know you are what's eating you. You are what's eating you. You are what's eating you. Face burn like a blue tip flame.
Sax blowing like a midnight train.
Man, I feel the need to make this piano bleed.
Music is all I want, everything else is just a front for Jazztown, Jazztown, Jazztown. When the lights burn down.
And now we go to part 2 with Ricky Sebastian talking about the birth of Street's My Darlin New Orleans, followed by John Magnie talking about his participation in the group.